The following program is made possible in part by the generous support of Harry Belafonte, Brooklyn Union, and New York National Bank.
African American Legends discusses the exploits of African Americans in areas as varied as business, sports, politics, and media. Today on African American Legends, we will be having a true legend in the field of politics. The first African American mayor, the 106th mayor of the city of New York, my friend David Norman Dinkins. Glad to have you with us today on African American Legends.
Thank you, Roscoe, but I got to tell you, I'm much too young to be a legend.
Well, we're all legends. We're all legends as we do these things. But speaking about being a legend, just how did you get into politics? I've heard the story many times about some of the things that you've done, but I think it's important to hear that.
Well, I guess at the outset I should say that I didn't start out to be a politician or be in politics. I was a lawyer. I am a lawyer. I practiced law, and in the very beginning, when I was in law school, I worked full-time at night in a liquor store. I went to law school full-time in the day in Brooklyn, living in Harlem. And so when I finished and was admitted to the bar, I went downtown, put on shirt and tie, went to my office, and then at night I went up to the liquor store where I made the money to pay the rent. So I held two jobs, so to speak, even after law school. And then there came a time when I was able to give up the night job, and at that point I joined a political club. This would have been around 1957 or 8, and because that's what all lawyers did. And I joined the political club of J. Raymond Jones, known as the Fox, first African-American ever to head so-called Tammany Hall.
Which was the New York County Democratic
New York
Committee.
County Democratic Organization. A brilliant man, and so many of us owe our start to him. And so I joined that club, and about 1965, I was asked if I wanted to run for the assembly, and I said yes. I ran successfully. And interestingly enough, two members of the club who were good friends of mine, law partners at a point, assisted me in that campaign. One was Fritz Alexander, who later went on to become the only African-American ever to serve a full term in our highest court, the Court of Appeals, and Bernard Jackson. Bernie was a Supreme Court justice, state Supreme Court justice, and has since retired from that. He's in the private sector now. But the three of us, we just had a grand time, and we went out and won. In fact, I defeated a fellow, Franz Leichter, who is today a senator in New York State legislature, and he and I are good friends. We have been friends ever since that election. But Ray Jones in that club, so many wonderful, brilliant people passed through there, and people who were not members of that club but who he helped. Like Charlie Rangel, who is today, of course, in the Congress. Percy Sutton would not have been borough president had not Ray Jones had the single vote. That is to say, he had the power to suggest to the city council who should succeed the borough president when there was a vacancy, and he picked Percy Sutton. And to show you how these things work, I say always that each of us stands on somebody's shoulders, and I stand on the shoulders of some of the heroes and heroines that you've got listed here, and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. And I always include Percy Ellis Sutton, because if Percy hadn't run so well for borough president and later for mayor in 1977, I never would have had an opportunity. And so I owe it to Ray, to him, to you, Roscoe, and so many who helped and guided me along the way.
One thing you didn't mention is before you became a lawyer, you were at Howard University, which used to be called the capstone of Negro education,
Right.
and you were a mathematics major, and you were in school at the same time as the former ambassador to the United Nations, Andrew Young.
Yeah. Andy Young was brilliant, and he started college at about 16, I guess. And he was a year or so behind me, but we became good friends. We're in the same fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha. I was the dean of probates when he was on the pro line. And Andy Young then, we used to call him Little Andy Young. Everybody liked him. And I swear to God, he has not changed from that day to this.
And everybody still likes and respects him.
He's the same wonderful person.
Well, now, getting to be mayor, how did you get to be the 106th mayor?
Well, I should say at the outset that I didn't start out to be mayor. I was never one of those persons who said, well, first I'll get to this level, and then I'll run for that, and then I'll ultimately run for mayor. It did not happen that way. When Percy Sutton in '77 ran for mayor, he was then the borough president of Manhattan. And I said, Percy, what about the borough presidency since you're going to run for mayor? He said, you should run for that. These offices were contested at the same time. So I ran. And I lost. I ran again, and I lost. And it wasn't until the third time that I succeeded. As a matter of fact, I would encounter people, and they would say, what do you do? And I'd say, I run for borough president, because that seemed to be all I did. But I succeeded in 1985, and then as 1989 approached, Ed Koch, at that point, was in his third term as mayor of the city of New York, a Democrat. And there was some displeasure with his stewardship, and we were sort of seeking someone to oppose him. And there came a time when it seemed logical that I should be that person. I didn't start out to do that.
It became logical because of the leadership that you took as borough president, conducting studies on education and decentralization and homeless and children who were being abused, and you brought task forces of experts of various ethnic and racial backgrounds together, so that in a sense you became almost a consensus candidate.
Well, I suppose it did develop that way, but I was quite prepared to support, for instance, Basil Patterson, had he determined to run. Basil, you will recall, considered running in 1985, and he would have been a wonderful candidate. He and I are longtime friends, and we were partners in a law firm. But I was pleased with the record that we had been able to compile as Manhattan Borough President. Had a lot of good people that worked awfully hard, and a lot of people who were not in government, but were part of the various commissions and boards, and you helped in that as well. And so that at least when I sought the office, it gave me a background so that I could say I know something of municipal government. And in the primary, I had three opponents. Ed Koch, a popular three-term incumbent. Harrison J. Golden, I think one of the most articulate people I've ever encountered, and most knowledgeable about New York City government, had been the controller. And Dick Ravitch, successful business person who had served in the public sector as well. So I was pleased that we were able to succeed with the majority vote. We got more votes than the three of them combined. But then came the general election. And in a city with an overwhelmingly Democratic majority, heavily Democratic, up against a Republican who had not sought office before, and we won by the skin of our teeth. So when people ask me...
We won by about 40,000 votes, I think.
Right. So when people ask me what happened in '93 when we lost by about the same margin, I said the real question is what happened in '89.
That's a very good point. Now, at your inauguration, which was on a cold January 1, many of us were just so proud to see Dave Dinkins standing there giving this inaugural address, and we want to share with our audience a few minutes of your inaugural address.
Our new mayor, the Honorable David N. Dinkins.
foot soldiers on the march to freedom, here and everywhere. We all belong to the America that Lincoln called the last best hope of earth. In advancing that hope, our most powerful weapon is example. And this year, this city has given powerful proof of the proposition that all of us are created equal. I stand here before you today as the elected leader of the greatest city of a great nation, to which my ancestors were brought, chained and whipped in the hold of a slave ship. We have not finished the journey toward liberty and justice, but surely we have come a long way. This day is not a tribute to me. It is a tribute to you, the people of New York. And the government we inaugurate here will belong to you, not to any elite or any narrow interest. Ours will be a civic forum, an open democracy that hears diverse views and voices before it decides, a democracy that holds out hope for the hopeless and assuages the fears of the fearful, a democracy that appeals to what is best in us and strives to bring us together. I see New York as a gorgeous mosaic of race and religious faith, of national origin and sexual orientation, of individuals whose families arrived yesterday and generations ago, coming through Ellis Island or Kennedy Airport, or on buses bound for the Port Authority. In that spirit, I offer this fundamental pledge. I intend to be the mayor of all the people of New York. This administration will never lead by dividing, by setting some of us against the rest of us, or by favoring one group over others. This administration will redefine the relationship between City Hall and our local neighborhoods and communities, from City Island to Staten Island, from East Harlem to East New York. We will empower people, and we will respect the need for neighborhood stabilization. We will encourage local business development, and we will emphasize community-based efforts to provide prenatal care, lead screening, child care, after-school programs, and centers of culture and companionship for seniors. Again and again, we will tend to the grassroots to nurture the initiatives that will become the new ideas of New York's future. This administration will seek an inclusive prosperity, not one that leaves too many lost amidst the wealth and grandeur that surrounds us. We will join with business and labor to build the economy of the 21st century, and we will ask them to join with us to prepare our people to work in it, to earn their own way, and to move ahead. This administration will renew the quest for social justice, whether the issue is education or affordable housing, the environment, health care, or consumer rights, the shame of homelessness, or the pain of AIDS. We will speak out against national policies that offer cold indifference instead of compassion. And we will set our priorities to strengthen the weak, to help those who have been hurt, and to keep the middle class living in New York City. I recognize that we cannot do everything we should, that our finances may get worse before they get better, that for now our dreams are bigger than our budget. We must assure long-term fiscal stability. We face difficult times ahead, and we will make the difficult choices.
That was certainly a glorious day, David, but very soon after you gave that speech, you were faced with a number of challenges. The budget, race relations, relations with the federal government, etc. Which of these problems were the most vexing for you?
Well, each was important, but I don't know that you could say one was more important than the other, but each was important. Now, for instance, we face a very serious fiscal situation. Federal government had been contributing about 19.4% of our city budget, which was $30 to $32 billion. And it is down now to around 9.7, so sort of from 20% to 10%, sort of cut in half. So we had to find ways to handle that. I'm pleased to say that we were able to balance all of our budgets on time and using the generally accepted accounting principles. So I think we did a good job in that sense. I have a very fine team of people who worked on that. The race relations situation was a very serious one. We had, in my time, the famous Crown Heights circumstance, wherein a tragic accident caused the death of Gavin Cato, a young black lad, and in its immediate aftermath, there was a Jewish fellow pulled from a car, and eventually he died. And I suppose it will haunt me forever, because there are those who believe that the city was responsible for his death in that they say we held back the cops. This is untrue. This is not what happened. It was particularly painful to me, given that I have a record of some accomplishment with the Jewish community and support for the State of Israel over a very long period of time, compounded by the fact that my deputy mayor for public safety, Milton Mullen, the same Milton Mullen who's issuing the Mullen report very recently on police corruption. Milton Mullen was Jewish from Brooklyn, at my side throughout this whole period, and the Hasidic community about a year and a half ago gave him an award. I am being personally sued, as is the case with Lee Brown, who was a police commissioner at the time. But we learned a lot from the Crown Heights circumstance, so that following the Rodney King verdict in Los Angeles, when many communities across our land were in great difficulty, we had relative calm in New York. So much so that I was publicly praised by Ed Koch, the former mayor, Alphonse D'Amato, Republican United States Senator, and Rudolph Giuliani, who later, of course, ran against and defeated me for mayor.
And used in the campaign some language that suggested that you didn't do what you should have done.
And I think that's unfortunate, because that's just not true, and that's not the case. We had a problem in the Washington Heights section of our city, wherein a young Dominican was shot and killed by police officers, and there was a lot of unrest, and I called upon the Cardinal O'Connor, came walked the streets with me, and we calmed that neighborhood. And in so doing, we got the assistance of the family of the deceased young man. And then there came allegations that this young man had been a drug dealer, and we were, quote, coddling the drug dealers, as opposed to being concerned with the victims of crime. All of this is, of course, just baseless, but it's something we faced. But I am proud of the record of my administration. I don't mean me personally, but I mean those persons that I was privileged to have work with me. And I'm proud of the fact that we had a very diverse administration. African Americans, Latinos, Asians, gays, lesbians, Asians, the disabled, the two kinds of people, those who are disabled and the rest of us who are temporarily able-bodied. But we had it all in this administration, and I'm very happy and pleased about that.
If you were to pick out one particular thing that you were able to accomplish, that you're most proud of, what would that be?
Well, I suppose in some ways the thing that was most difficult and will have a lasting effect in many ways was our so-called Safe Street, Safe City program, where we had to change the laws so as to segregate funds for police. And we had to do this. We had to get the support of the business community in the city, the support of the city council, and then ultimately the support of the state legislature and the governor. And there were those who said it would never happen, but we did it. And we did this, I might add, in a climate at a time when the police department was not supportive of me, never has been. But what's important to me is not who supports me and who doesn't, but what is the right thing to do, and that's what we did, and I'm pleased about it.
Well, one thing about that, which you didn't mention, you call the program Cops and Kids.
Right. Well, it's
so,
subtitled.
Yeah.
You're right. It's subtitled. Safe Street, Safe City is subtitled Cops and Kids because we recognize the import of having monies expended to prevent persons from turning to antisocial and illegal behavior in the first place. There are many sort of sub-pieces of that. Some of the work done by our people in our youth bureau, Richard Murphy and others who work there. We have what we call a youth line that operates today that the current mayor continued, I'm pleased to say. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a young person can get a live person on the other end of the wire.
Usually another young person.
Right. Can get a person who can assist, and if it requires expertise, there are supervisory assistance available. I'm happy about that. I'm pleased about our program that we call Communicare, so that less often will people have to rely on the emergency room of a hospital as a family doctor. A number of things that we have been able to do, some of which they will not attempt to dismantle, although much that they will. But people sometimes say to me that, did you like being mayor? And I said, of course I did. It's a great job. It's the greatest job in the world for one who likes public service. And although you have the frustrations at the inability to achieve all you would wish, the frustration at being misunderstood, or the inability to sufficiently well explain yourself so that somebody can say, well, I understand what you mean, but I agree or disagree. But all those frustrations faded into nothing. Every time you saw a child smile or a senior would reach out and thank you for something you forgot you'd done in the first place.
But you didn't mention one thing that all of us were very proud of and remember. Nelson Mandela's visit to New York City, which really was a catalyst for bringing Mandela to
that was our crowning moment. It was not appreciated at the time, and I suppose maybe even today some people don't appreciate it as fully as they should. But when I saw Nelson Mandela descend the steps of the plane at JFK, my heart filled. And he stayed with my wife, Joyce, and me at Gracie Mansion, he and Winnie, and we spent a lot of time with him. And the amazing thing about that freedom fighter is a total absence of bitterness. And to this day, I use him in describing to children how important it is to be able to reason. I said he survived more than 27 years in prison, not because he was big and strong, but because of his mind. And in recent months, I've been to South Africa a couple of times. I've been to Haiti. I've been to Jamaica, West Indies, and spoken to children in all those places. And I've said the same thing to them that I say to children right here in New York City. So that was a great moment. I said that when I went to South Africa in 1991 for the first time, I said I was happy to come to the land of the continent of my ancestors. And boy, what did I say that for? You know, folks back, some folks were very displeased about it. But it was right to go, just as it was right for me to go to Israel when I went.
Well, why do you think the electorate, in its wisdom or lack thereof, decided to retire you to private life and elect Rudy Giuliani?
Well, that's what I meant earlier when I said that the real question is not what happened in 93, but what happened in 89. Because in 93, we lost by about the same margin that provided victory in 89. And given the overwhelming Democratic enrollment, and I was a Democratic nominee, I should have won by a larger margin in 89. When the President of the United States came here in 93 and campaigned for me and threw away his prepared text, and in his speech at this luncheon, he said that he didn't know why this was such a close contest, given the overwhelming Democratic enrollment. And perhaps it was because some people didn't wish to vote for someone who was different than they. And the headlines in the papers the next day said, President introduces race into contest.
Like it wasn't already there.
You see, it's my contention that we will never, ever solve the problems of race in this country if we act as though they don't exist. We have to very frankly and candidly confront racism and bigotry and anti-Semitism and homophobia wherever we find it. And I think it's important to understand that as go the least of us will go each of us. And anybody that makes the mistake of thinking that that other group, it's okay to talk about them, they're mistaken, because when you leave the table, they'll talk about you.
Well, that's one of the things that has always made us proud of you, Dave Dinkins, as mayor. Now, what advice would you give to young African Americans who want to go into politics?
Well, frankly, I give the same advice to everyone, to African Americans, perhaps more especially, because we have been denied over time, and we have nowhere near the representation that we should have in terms of numbers. But I would say to all young people, and one of the things I hope that I will achieve at Columbia University, where I'm privileged to serve in their School of International and Public Affairs, is to persuade young people to come and give of themselves in public service. It is so easy these days when people have an absence of respect for the office of the presidency, for instance. Mm-hmm. They don't have to like William Jefferson Clinton, but they ought to respect the office. And too few people, or not enough do, or too many don't.
And of course, you earned that respect. You projected it to our young people and to the country as a whole. And now that you, as you say, have been retired to being the status of a private citizen.
I've been elected a private citizen.
Those messages will be revered and heard over and over again. And as we come to the close of today's segment of African American Legends, I want to thank my friend, our former mayor, Dave Dinkins, for being with us and sharing those wonderful insights. Thanks,
Dr. Brown, it's always nice to be with a fighter pilot.
Thank you, buddy.